Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Chris.
Okay. So
Okay, let's just start. Chris, I am recording it.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Yeah, I am. If you want to as well on your side, you can, but I'm recording it through this system and we'll cut it and edit it as required.
Okay.
We are having this meeting on Treaty 1 and Dakota Nation territory and traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. Chris, I definitely appreciate you doing this for council. We do have several council members on here. Some will be dropping off. Some have indicated an interest to have the complete presentation should they drop off. And I'll do everything that I can to put it in a place where they can access it accordingly.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll hand it over to you.
All right, thank you. So as a bit of an introduction, I'm a second-year law student right now. My side job is I work for the Winnipeg School Division. I've been studying traffic issues and advocating for the last 13 years. And this work is really a derivative of my earlier work where I was studying safety issues such as missing school zone signs, speed limit signs, issues with crosswalk design, all of that kind of stuff. And this work really began in the summer because I was looking at issues regarding configuration of traffic signals. That's where you put, like, where you place the heads, whether you have two turning arrows, one turning arrow, those kinds of things. So that's kind of what took me into traffic signals. And waste was something I was very much aware of. I had noticed it, but this has taken on a new life because about a year ago, the department, and even prior to that, the department was saying in a lot of cases that I was right on many issues, but they couldn't fix it because they just didn't have enough money. And missing school zone signs was one particular area of that. So that's when I started looking at the waste, saying that basically saying that if you have the money, you should be using it to fix these things, not doing the waste. So it's really safety concerns, which are what drove me over to it. So with that introduction, I'm going to turn on a screen share. Does anybody have any preliminary questions or comments? Am I coming through clear?
You're coming through nice and clear. I had indicated that if they have questions, they can put them in the chat. You can monitor it as you have time.
Okay. I'm just setting up my desktop now. I am going to enable screen share right now. Okay. Is everybody able to see my screen?
We can see your screen.
Okay. So starting off, how I went about this work is I've audited every intersection going back to 2007. Every intersection I've studied goes back to 2007. I have studied 513 of Winnipeg's 681 intersections. I have looked at every intersection, all the ones that aren't yet fully analyzed. I have gone through them just to make sure that there's nothing, really anomalous about any of them. And it's really the same pattern. So I'm pretty sure I've found just about everything. So as I analyzed an intersection, I was gathering the data, creating a massive raw data file. And then what I would do is I've now created a separate Word document that's full of links that's really just the best examples of each category of waste. So just to give you a brief idea of what I've got, if you can see my screen here, these are the raw data files that I've got. So here is the primary raw data file that most of the data is in. So sorry, it just takes a second here. So to give you an idea, it's all categorized by type of work. So I've gone through every intersection, identified all the work that I found to be either clearly unnecessary or suspected, or in some cases it's just even work that contradicts other works, showing that there's lack of patterns. So this is the 96 pages. This is my primary raw data file. Now, I have also got other files, such as this is a file of my list of rebuilt and new intersections by year, so that I'm able to go and analyze the different patterns by year for what the department's done. The red ones, for example, are the intersections that have been converted to cantilever style poles. The black ones are ones that were rebuilt, but davits were maintained. Another list, for example, is this is the list of redundant signal standards that I've identified. The red ones are the ones installed since 2007. The black ones are the ones that have been there the whole time, and the gray ones are the ones that were there but removed since 2007. And again, it's all categorized by type of standard and type of application. So what I've done is I have taken all of this raw data and basically pulled out some of the more representative examples of the issues that I've found, and I have created a Word document where I've organized the different locations in the same order that they appear in my raw data files, but just with selected locations. So it's basically a much more condensed version of the raw data. And so that's in the presentation folder. Now, I'm going to preface this with just saying how I've laid it out. What I've done is I have created 4 different categories, and that will correspond with the 4 half-hour sessions approximately to show this. So the first is poles and just foundational infrastructure. So moving of poles, changing the types of poles, height of poles, and some of the more intricate details like interlinked devices for coordinating between signals, moving of control cabinets, intersection cameras. I threw into that category because it really was just kind of a floater. And then, so that's the first one. The second one is everything involving vehicle signals. So that's things like 1 left turn arrow, 2 left turn arrows, side mount heads, all of this involving vehicle signals. And for the primary part of that presentation is actually going to be a PowerPoint. And this was the first presentation I did on this subject matter, because it really was the roots of this, of where I started this summer before I expanded into waste. Part 3 is to do with pedestrian infrastructure. So I'll explain issues with vehicle heads, push button placement, adding push buttons, removing push buttons, changing the colors of push buttons or APS units, pedestrian head placement, rebuilding pedestrian corridors, things like that. That's all in part 3. And part 4 is more conclusionary. And what I do in part 4 is I go to, instead of going by issue, I go by intersection, and I just go to some select intersections and do a bit of a time lapse showing how all these different patterns identified in the first 3 sections overlay with each other in a particular and manifest into different patterns that come out at a specific intersection. So that's really what part 4 is just summarizing all of the first 3 parts, but showing them all progressing throughout the time lapse of a particular intersection. So with that being said, I'm going to now open up, well, this document here is a Word document I created that's kind of part 1. It's more of an explanatory document. So this one I can certainly provide to anyone that wants it after. But the one I'm going to use is the one that's meant for just for presenting. And this is why I've been hesitant to send it to anybody, because really without this narration, what I'm about to show really makes no sense. Just like in my raw data file, all of these are links to Google Maps, and when you open it, you just go to that intersection at that time. It's meaningless without me explaining the purpose of showing this. So I'm going to start off with explaining that the patterns I've observed are that intersections seem to be not going in a pattern. The irony of it is that the pattern is there's no pattern. There seems to be a lot of reversal of of infrastructure put in, and the only thing I have been able to find out of it is when you first look at these intersections, a lot of it just looks like a whole lot of random moving and random things happening. I have been able to pull out of it some patterns by years and different eras to deduce that the department was doing this from, say, 2013 to 14, and then they were doing this in 15 and 16, but of course with a ocean of exceptions. There are some patterns that manifest when you start considering the times work was done. So the key thing here is recognizing that I'm not an engineer. I'm not really arguing in this work that one way is better necessarily than another. I certainly have my opinions and certainly can advocate. Wherever I advocate, it tends to be based on on engineering manuals or literature. More so what this is showing is contradiction, where what they do at one location, they'll do it another, or they'll put it in and then take it back out. And certainly both ways can't be right. So the point being that definitely half of the work they're doing at the least is simply wrong if you look at the other half they're doing, because all the way through the system, we're just seeing inherent contradictions. So that will come out as I go. So starting off, sorry, I just need a drink. There seems to be some disorganization in the department. Fermor Niagara Place, you can see, is the first one. I don't have a link because it didn't show up on Google Maps, but I saw the department putting in traffic signals during the construction work on Fermor, and then halfway through, they only got the south side of the intersection built, then the traffic signals disappeared. It almost seemed like an abandoned decision to signalize that intersection, just went back to stop sign control. And there's other examples of that, the ones that do appear on Google Maps. So to show one as their first example, here is the corner of Langside and Portage. This is what's known as a half signal, where the signalization only controls the pedestrian crosswalks. This is it in 2012. Approximately around 2013, the department was going to convert this to a full signalization as a T intersection. So this pole popped up here now with the heads facing Langside, and you can see that the pedestrian heads showed up in order to convert this to a full signalized intersection. Vehicles were going to have to turn right, so I'd assume that these were going to be right-pointing arrows, and displays were put up for cyclists to cross Portage Avenue, or I should say turn left. That was put up around approximately 2013 because it's already there by April 14. If you go to 15, you can see everything is still hooded. Go up another year, and now it's been abandoned. It's gone. There's just caps on the ground now where those poles were put in, right there where the davit was and where the pedestrian heads were. So all this work was done to convert this to full signalization and never actually happened. The hoods appear to have stayed on the entire time. And these heads here for the cyclist crossing, they have remained constant the whole time. They've been moved. If you look back to 2014, you can see that it was originally on this shaft pole and this davit, but during a street renewal, things have shifted. And to this day, the heads are still covered. They appear to have been put in around 2013. So we've got these heads aging about 8 years that have remained covered the whole time. So that's just kind of an introductory example. Now, going more into some of these issues with signal standards, what I'm finding a lot of is use of redundant standards, where corners will just become polluted with multiple poles that just clearly aren't needed. And when looking at other cities, you just don't see this pattern. Saskatoon especially, the intersections are very clean, where you'll see a standard on one standard on a corner holding all the displays. And what we see through Winnipeg is there's a pattern of unnecessary poles being put in, but there's also intersections that are very clean. There's the odd corner that will have just the one pole that shows that it easily can be done with one pole. And these intersections are very often indistinguishable from the other intersections that have multiple poles. And what I'm also going to show throughout this work is there's a lot of cases where an intersection will go from having multiple poles and then be consolidated down to one, or vice versa. So as an example, here's an intersection where regardless of whether it could be done with one pole or not, I would certainly say it could be done with two. You see this davit pole here is further up the road. you don't need this second pole here. You easily could have mounted the display on what's called a joint use arm and just bolted it to the light standard. And a lot of locations will have that. And so I call it avoidance of joint use because there's just so many locations we see where signal poles are virtually touching light poles that clearly could have accommodated the heads. Here's another example where the pole's just right up against the road and a street light pole is very close to it. Here's another one. This one particularly involves a corridor where you can see this is called a cantilever style pole. You can see the corridors virtually touching the streetlight standard. They actually had to put the sign on the streetlight standard for the crossing. And here's another example of a streetlight pole that very easily could have held the pedestrian head, but they chose to put the pole just over a few feet. Are these images coming through, or is the lag causing problems for anybody?
They're coming through, Chris, but you are moving quite fast through them.
Okay, I'll slow down. This is another example where you can see a cantilever style pole that's holding the head over the road, and there's a light pole that's virtually right behind it. Could have easily held the all of the signals. And what you see at other locations, some that were joint use, are actually split. So going back in time, here's one where it was originally built at joint use. You can see the boulevard vehicle head is strapped to the side of that light standard. Sometime around, I'm going to guess 2011-ish, they split it. Added this, what's called a shaft pole, put the head on top, and to this day, now going to 2021, that same light pole is still there. Easily could have continued to hold that head. And other locations, you'll see the opposite happen, where heads that are on separate poles will then be consolidated, removed, and then added to light poles. So it's going both ways. There's no pattern here. Some cases I've found the poles were actually much closer. The streetlight poles were actually in a more ideal place than where they chose to put up a signal standard. So here you can see a curved pole. This is what's known as a davit. And it's right in occupying space in the sidewalk. And you can see that it's further down the street from the intersection. In a lot of cases, I'll get to this, where poles are moving, you'll see the poles come closer to the intersection. In this case, the department actually placed the davit further away from the intersection than where it could have been had they just used what's called a joint use. You can see the light poles right here that could have held this bicycle head and held this pedestrian display, and they actually would have put it closer to the crosswalks. Just to the left of it, the black pole, you can see that that's actually an older joint use standard that has a street light up on the top of it. That's what it should look like. And what I'm saying is that joint use really should have been done a lot more often, and by avoiding it in cases like this, where we're polluting intersections with unnecessary poles. So going to the next one here, just as an example of this pollution, I call it pole pollution. Here's an intersection. You can see 4 different poles, 3 of them in tight cluster there, right on the corner. You easily could have been accommodated with 2 joint uses. All these heads could have been put on these 2 what's called streetlight davits. But instead, we now have 4 poles, where we could have had 2. Now, as an example of the opposite, here's an intersection that was recently signalized. Here it is in 2016. You can see this streetlight pole here. And around 2017, they added what's called a half signal to it, which is a traffic signal that controls just a crosswalk to cross a major road. The side road, if present, will remain as a stop sign. And in this particular case, they did choose to do a joint use, where the signal arm was just bolted to the light standard midway up it. So it shows that joint use is very much possible and can be done, but in more cases, it tends to be avoided, where unnecessary poles are added in very close proximity to existing light poles. So that's the starting off. So that's an example of redundant, what's called davit poles holding that lights over the road. Another pattern we see is even within signals, we'll see poles that are just very close together where one could have clearly held all of the heads. Here we have two poles. I would say this light standard possibly is too far back to have made into a joint use, so that's fine. But we got two city signal standards standing in very close proximity, or it's just that narrow width of sidewalk between them. There's no reason why an arm couldn't have been bolted to this one here on the right to have held all the signal heads. It didn't need to have a separate pole right here. And if you look at many other locations, Ronald and Portage comes to mind, or Portage and St. James, you will actually see locations where the signal pole is put well behind the crosswalk, and they seem to be avoiding having the poles right up against the side of the road. In this case, they already had a pole right at the place they normally often like to put the pole for this, what would be on this major road, and instead opted for a redundant pole. As another example, this is the same thing where this pole is actually closer to the intersection had it been just a combined location, or it could have been a little further back and have accommodated everything. And again, this is in sharp contrast to patterns we see in other cities. So to show an example, here's London, Ontario, where they simply put up one pole and put all of the heads onto one pole. This is the kind of consolidation that really seems to be lacking in Winnipeg. And I've come across examples where these cantilever poles are placed so close you can barely even walk between them. Their bases are virtually almost touching each other. And in contrast to, like I said, here in other cities, you see this where they will simply consolidate the poles. So those are my examples of redundant poles. I kind of go in a hierarchy where I start big and go small. So there's the bigger poles. Now we're going to go down to what's called a shaft pole. These are poles that hold vehicle heads just on the side, or in some cases, just a pedestrian head. They don't go up over the road at all. They're just a perfectly straight vertical pole. So here's an example of a shaft pole that is clearly redundant. You can see this rounded pole is called a davit that easily could have held all of these heads. There's no reason why this little pole here needed to be separate from the davit. This head could have been strapped to the side of the davit right here, and both pedestrian heads could have been consolidated. There's no need for this redundant pole. As another example, Ellis and Yonge Street, you can see, again, the poles are very close together. And these pedestrian heads, this is something we'll talk about later, but these pedestrian heads are actually flipped. But if you go back in time, you can see they were originally facing forwards. So if these heads are facing forwards, you can flip them sideways. Clearly, either one of these poles is in a position that both heads could have been on either one of them. So again, it shows the redundancy. To show what a consolidation looks like, all you have to do is look over to the other side of this corner, and there's one right there. There's a consolidation of a pole where one davit is holding both pedestrian heads and the side vehicle head for the cross street. So there it is, all on one pole. That is certainly the exception of what we see here in Winnipeg, although there have been a lot of locations in the last year that were consolidated. And again, that's much of a pretty big project to do consolidation. And then there's other locations still being built brand new where poles are separate. Inkster and Sinclair is another example. And for some reason that link is broken. Sorry. So here's an example of an intersection that was a brand new build around 2012. So you can see here in 2009, it's not even signalized yet. So it's built around 2011. There it is, brand new build, still hooded. And here it is with everything uncovered. And you can clearly see that this shaft pole, again, is redundant. This davit here on the left side could have held it. And I know it would put the display a little further to the left. And to counter any of those points, I can simply say there are locations where the davit is on this side of the sidewalk and the vehicle head for the crossroad is placed on the side of the davit. So another example of consolidation is right on the opposite side of the corner. There's, again, a single davit holding everything. So it can be done. It's the exception, but it can be done. Should be done a lot more often. Here's another example of a rebuild from 2021. This is just from this year. You can see this, it really isn't any further off the road. This shaft pole here is actually behind the sidewalk. It was, I believe this one was moved. You can see it was in front of the sidewalk right beside the road before it got moved over on the opposite side of the sidewalk. And again, that cantilever pole is right there. This head could have been the side right where this one is, and this one could have just been over directly above that pedestrian head. And again, there are locations that are done that way. So again, it's just another example of these redundant poles clogging up intersections. And Sargent and Clifton, to go back in time, here's a older intersection. And this is the norm. You can see it's got 4 shaft poles holding the side heads on the left and 4 davits. This is an old street view image. This is around 2007. Around 2008-ish, the city took out this davit and this shaft pole and consolidated them around where a shaft pole was. It clearly was because of this sidewalk work, but here's the consolidated standard with everything on the one standard. So it shows, again, that had that standard just been put there all along, consolidation could have just been done right from the beginning. And this is clearly not a temporary install, because we jump ahead 10 years, that davit is still there today holding all of those heads on one pole. And since then, these other poles have all been changed. And here they are now, brand new shiny poles, and we still have the redundant ones. You can see all these redundant poles on the other 3 corners of the intersection are still there today, with our one consolidated pole only in the northwest corner. Yet all sides of this intersection really are the same. It's a perfectly square intersection. There's no obscure angles or anything. So if one side could be consolidated, why can't the other 3? Oh, sorry, I'm actually going to the same thing. And here's an example of a consolidation that was done, I believe, around 2016, but here it is. You can see this cantilever pole's well off the road here and consolidated. And originally, these were all split. You can see this is double davits here, double davits on this corner. And looking at this setup, you would almost think there's no way you could ever consolidate all these heads onto one pole. Yet somehow they found a way. They placed the cantilever right in the middle of the convergence here of the crosswalks, put all the heads on one pole. So it clearly shows that consolidation can be done. And more often than not, when we see consolidation is when they're actually salvaging out already existing poles and condensing them. And my point is they should have been built condensed all along. The redundant, if it could be condensed, the redundant poles should never have been there. And what we're seeing is new builds still have these redundant poles, while existing intersections are commonly rebuilt to then move to consolidation. So that's my piece on redundant shaft poles with vehicle heads. Now I'm going to get over to redundant pedestrian poles. Inkster and Keewatin is a very interesting location because it's another example of one that was not consolidated with the original build and then later was converted. So you can see here we have the davit and we have this redundant pedestrian pole right here. Then they redid the sidewalk. So that first image was from 2009. Now we're up to about 2012, and you can see the cement's all been redone. It's all brand new cement, and we've got these new what's called tactiles for pedestrians added. And the poles are still in their same places. That was around 2012. Then around, I'm guessing 2013, because the work's done by 14, here's the consolidation. You can see that that davit, which was behind the sidewalk here, jumps up to the corner. The redundant head pole here is taken out and the heads are consolidated. There it is. And of course, that was done right after all the cement work was done. So you can see all these outlines in the cement here where the cement had to be jackhammered out, cut. You can see the base there, the rounded hole there from where the base was for that redundant pole. You can see the rounding here from where the davit was. And this is obviously all torn out to be moving the underground wiring. Now, I don't know why they would go and consolidate it at a later point, but it should have been built like that all along. And now, regardless of the redundancy of this extra pole, somebody might say, well, maybe the base failed. Maybe a car hit that pole. And then they decided to consolidate, setting aside the issue of the redundant pole. But that clearly wasn't the case because that's the northeast corner. Here is the northwest corner. This one did not have a redundant pole. This davit was behind the sidewalk. Clearly, it shows that there is fluidity in where these poles can be placed. It's behind the sidewalk, holding both pedestrian heads, so it's already consolidated. And then they did the same cement work to it. Here is all brand new cement with pedestrian tactiles, done the same time as the other corner. The other corner being this one here, the northeast. We're now looking to northwest. Jumping to 2014, the same time as the other one, there was no redundant pole at this intersection, but you can see the poles torn out and moved over to the corner, and you can see the outline in the cement of where all that fresh cement had to be torn up. And the southeast now, third corner of the same intersection. So here we are in 2009. You can see it's all the old cement, redundant pedestrian pole. Jump ahead to 2012, and you can see it's all fresh, brand new cement with the tactiles, and the poles haven't budged. Go to 2014, and the poles again are removed and consolidated. And there's your outline in the cement where everything was dug up and all the wiring moved to consolidate to one pole. So again, my position is that these should have been consolidated right from the original build. It shouldn't have had to be something that was changed. If they were going to change it, they certainly should have changed it before rebuilding the sidewalk. And the fact that 3 of these 4 corners were done at the same time shows that it wasn't a matter of a car hit a particular pole. This is a part of a pattern. And also interesting about this intersection is the fourth and final corner being the southwest. They never did consolidate or move anything, and that one has been constant the whole time. The redundant pole still stands at that one. Now, what I'm going to show is this looks like that while mistakes may have been made in the past, albeit inefficiently, at least the city's cleaning up redundant poles. But that's not the pattern. The pattern is that redundant poles that are existing are being cleaned up with a great expense of moving or digging up concrete, moving davits and other poles with all the underground wiring being rerouted. That pattern is certainly there, but equally, we're seeing the addition of more redundant poles than ever on new builds or rebuilds. They're continually taking poles that are consolidated and then splitting them and adding these redundant poles. So existing locations with redundant poles are being consolidated at great expense, while the city is basically being seeded with future projects by continually adding more redundant poles whenever intersections are rebuilt. So that's the Inkster and Keewatin example. I'm now going to jump to Portage and Maryland. So this example here is, we're going to go very old. You can see here that the old pedestrian head's on the light standard. And here's an older pedestrian pole. Now, I'm certainly not about to argue that there wasn't justification to change this pole. It's clearly rusted, probably close to its end of life. So you jump ahead a year, and I would suggest this was probably done when the countdowns were put in. There's a brand new shiny pole now that they had just put in by 2014. So, and you can see they consolidated. They split the head off of the light pole, which was a joint use, and put them together on the one pole. So the number of poles at this intersection remained constant. We had the light, originally there was one head on the light pole and one head on the redundant pedestrian pole. I'd argue both could have been the light pole, but either way, we now have a brand new pedestrian pole here. In 2015, they do a street renewal and come along and split the pedestrian heads. So I'm going to try to get a better image here. Doesn't seem to like it, so So here it is after. There's the pedestrian pole unmoved that had both heads, and you can see they've now, while in 2014 they consolidated the heads onto this one pole, they've now split that head off that pole and added a redundant pole right here in the corner. So this was a case where the heads were split, then they were consolidated, and then they were split over a 2-year period with redundant pole added. So I've just shown locations where there were redundant poles that were salvaged and the heads were consolidated, and now we have the opposite where we had a location that started off consolidated and they've split it. Now we can go to the northwest corner. Here again, we have a very old redundant pole. Again, the pedestrian head could have been right here on the side of this joint use pole. And now moving up in around 2013, this is a subject for later discussion. This will come up in part 3. We now have flipping of the heads when they put in the countdowns. The fact that these heads are so easily flipped like this proves that this pole was redundant. If these heads could be flipped sideways like this to serve the opposite crosswalks than they previously did, then clearly either one of these poles could have held both heads. In this case, the joint use pole should have had both heads on it all along. And there's no push button or anything else that would explain the redundant pole. So now here we are in 2014. So we still have a redundant pole, but the heads are flipped sideways. We jump up to the street renewal of 2015. Here just before. Let's go to 16 after renewal. And that, while they added a redundant pole on this side, in this side, which had the redundant pole leading into the renewal, and was also a brand new redundant pole, it's torn out, and then the heads are consolidated onto the new davit. So this one, we started off with a redundant pole that they then changed to a brand new one and then tore it out and then consolidated the heads. While on this side, we had a redundant pole where they combined the heads onto it and then split it and added a redundant pole, making it the opposite of that side. Looking at a third corner on this, here again, we have the two heads on davit, and this is on a joint use. So we have no redundant pole here starting out. 2013 or 2014-ish, they had the countdowns. Here they are, and you can see that the head was pulled off the light standard, and they're consolidated onto the davit. Then the street renewal comes. And here we are in the street, leading into the street renewal. And that head that was previously on the davit is now pulled off the davit and put onto its own separate redundant pole. The head that originated on the light standard and moved to the davit the year before now remains in the davit. And you can see now we're now with a redundant pole at this corner when we previously had them both on this one. And you can see the distance across the sidewalk is not that big. That head easily could have been right here, and well, where it was and remained. And if you actually look back during the renewal, I'm going to try to show it. There's the new base installations. Now, this is done by private contractors at great expense. There's the new base install for the soon-to-be redundant pedestrian head pole. And you can see this davit is being moved about 2 feet. It's an already new pole. So it's not cars hitting poles. These poles are being moved. Whenever street renewals happen, these poles are just shuffled around. And again, there's no pattern of being moved closer to the intersection or further back. And I'll get over to that. So there's more with redundant poles. Here's a redundant pole starting off further back from the intersection. You can see it's got these heads split. Then they did the adding of the countdown. So we'll jump up to 15. And you see these all through the downtown. They abandoned the redundant pole. It was just standing there, abandoned with nothing on it. And you see downtown's actually littered with these redundant poles. The whole city is. They're all over the place. Dozens of these redundant poles that never should have been installed in the first place. The city will choose to consolidate the heads over to one pole and abandon the redundant that never should have been there in the first place. And now the heads are consolidated onto this shaft pole with the vehicle head, which I would argue they should have been all along, right from the start. Then the street renewal comes along and they are resplit. The redundant pole that was abandoned is torn out, and a new redundant pole is added just closer up to the corner. And there's the heads again split, but also facing sideways from how they originally did. And here's the opposite. Here's a redundant. So somebody might say, well, you know, at least the redundant pole puts the head, and having them flip sideways, at least the redundant pole puts the head closer to the edge of the crosswalk, or, you know, closer to the tactile. Well, after making that observation, then observe this one. Here we have the redundant pole placed right beside the road, and it got torn out. The head got moved over, and then we had consolidation on the davit here, which I'd argue should have been done all along. And it wasn't because of a crash or anything. Jump ahead 3 years, and it's still like that today. So there's a redundant pole that got taken out and consolidation added after the fact. And Henderson and McIver, redundant pole, head on the side of the davit, jump ahead when the countdowns were put in. Both heads were placed on the davit as they should have been all along. And there's one of our redundant poles that is jumping ahead another 3 years, still there today. And it's just one of dozens around the city. And here's an example of a creation of a redundant pole. This is a davit. A street renewal comes along in 2017. You can see the heads on it are consolidated. You jump ahead. They've changed the davit to a cantilever, changed the base. We'll talk about that in a bit. And here's a redundant pole added when the pedestrian head could have clearly just been the backside of this cantilever. Maybe since the cantilever is a couple feet away from the intersection, maybe they could have used a slightly longer arm, which is common in other cities, or just placed that cantilever a little bit further back from the corner. Either way, there's no need for this pole to have been added. And I'm sure if we wait long enough, we'll see a future project come along where that redundant pole is dug up, the cement's all jackhammered out, and then they'll consolidate. So I think everybody should get the point here. Again, we have, I'm just going to hammer a few off to quickly show. Here we have a brand new pole with consolidated heads. Jump ahead, and now they've added now they've torn out the pole. Sorry, it wasn't redundant. We had one pole with consolidated heads. They've torn the pole out, moved it up, and added another one right here beside the road for what could have easily been on one pole and had been on one pole. And here are Aaron Street and Sargent. We have a redundant pole with a pedestrian head, and we have this shaft pole with the other pedestrian head. Again, should have had consolidation. And eventually they did. They took this pole out, moved the head up onto a davit and consolidated. And here we have a really interesting one. 2014, we have one pole here holding both pedestrian heads for crossing this little island. So then 2014, they came along and split the heads off this pole and added a new redundant pole here. Just before they did just before the street renewal comes along, and those poles are now completely gone. Just poof, the whole intersection has been rebuilt. So had we just left it alone for another couple of years, the poles would have just been gone. And here's one where the poles are split. Jump ahead a year, both poles are torn out and they're combined. Here's one where the joint use pole had both heads on it just before the renewal. A year later, they've changed the joint use pole, put a new base in, and split them. So the point I'm trying to hammer home here is, again, we have consolidation. In 2019, the street renewal happens, and we have a splitting. The point I'm trying to make with this is, however an intersection's built, whether we have a redundant pole or not, if the redundant pole is there, they'll tear it out and consolidate it. If there isn't a redundant pole and it's already built efficiently, then it'll become a project to add the redundant pole. So what we see is this constant flip-flopping of intersections, that the only pattern being, however it was built, it will then become the opposite after street renewals or any other work is done. And all of these patterns of head flipping and consolidating and splitting shows that all of these poles, for the most part, are redundant. Never should have been there. And last one, redundant pole right in the middle of the crosswalks, and moved and then taken out. There's the fresh cement and consolidated. So now moving forward, redundant push button poles. I call these toothpick poles. They break off all the time at the weld. This is a pole that's added just for a cycling push button, even though we have a pole right here that could have had the push button for the cyclists on this side of it. There's no reason to add this redundant pole. Now, somebody might look at this and say, well, the cyclist button needs to be on the right side of the crosswalk when the cyclist enters. And I would say, okay, fair point, except for the fact that many of them don't. And all builds done at the same time don't. Chief Peguis in Maine, Devai and Pembina Highway are examples where the push buttons on the left side of the entrance, and they are two-way crosswalks for cyclists. So again, a redundant pole that never should have been there. This is a corridor at the corner of Church and Salter. For some reason, it's not working. So this intersection never had any traffic signals of any kind. Around 20, so here we are just leading up to the fresh build. Here it is in 2017. It's new tactiles. 2018 comes along, and here we have a standard that I'd argue should have been a joint use, and now we have the pedestrian corridor added, and the push buttons, which easily could have been the backside of these poles right here. Instead, they chose to put in a toothpick pole on each side, holding the push button right beside the crosswalk. Now, that looks like might be a good idea, but if you go there today, during the street renewal from last summer, they actually tore those toothpick poles out and rerouted the wiring and then put the push buttons on the main cantilever poles, again, showing that that's how it should have been built 2 years earlier. So we got a brand new build with these redundant poles stuck in at the crosswalk, only to make it a future project 2 years later to then tear them out and put the push buttons over where they should have been all along. Now, moving over, let's talk a little bit about interlink devices. This is not something I know as much about, but I just want to show a pattern that I've uncovered to kind of show the theme here of how this whole thing's about just analyzing patterns and finding contradictions. These little square devices here are intersection interlinks. They're used to coordinate traffic signals and communicate between them. There was a mass install of them. Some of them date back, I've seen them as far back as 2008, but it seems the entire downtown area had a mass install of them around 2013. Now, I don't know how they were really functional, considering that so many intersections right in the middle of it didn't have them installed. And these interlink devices, I've read quite a bit about them. A lot of other cities do have them. Traffic signals will communicate, and now you can see here's a 90-degree turn where it's basically a chain effect. So the signal will come to one and then relay off the other to the next intersection. So here we have a 90-degree corner where this is Higgins and Main. The signal's coming up from south from Main up to Higgins, doing a 90-degree turn, and then it goes down Higgins and it communicates with the end one of the chain down a waterfront. So there's a mass install of these in 2013. Here we are at Logan and Main just before the install. And this is how big of operation it was putting so many of these in. This is a streetlight standard the city installed, putting the interlink devices up on the top of it. And you can see this is a bit of a three-way hub here. This one's pointing down Logan to communicate with the intersections down there. This one's going up to the one we just looked at, and this one's facing further back down Main. Whole bunch of these were put up around 2013. The point being, the whole system was torn out between 27 and 18. So it's really interesting. The city invested so much to install a system that was at most only in place for a few years. Now here, this pole's freshly installed in 14, but if you jump ahead, by April of 15, an accident had happened. The pole is knocked down. They've moved the pedestrian head temporarily over to this joint use pole, and later came back and reinstalled the pedestrian head back to a short pole, never putting the interlink devices back. Well, that break in the chain really reveals that they weren't in use. This is 2017 when the rest were still in place, but it clearly shows that this system was not in operations because whenever one was knocked down, the city didn't put it back up. Another example here is Princess and William. Here's the intersection in 2012 before the system's put in. Here it is in early 14. You can see this big pole put up with the devices on it. And that's April of 14. By August of 14, it's completely gone. Now this one was again doing a 90-degree corner. It was this one on the top was pointing down Princess Street to a hub further down by Notre Dame. And this one was facing down William Avenue, down to, it was linked obviously to Ellen Street, which had one on the back of the davit there facing it. So when this one was down, clearly that the chain was broken and never replaced. Now, considering the number of intersections there are that appeared to never have these devices, I don't think the system was ever in use. I think that the city invested great money around 2013 to put it in and never actually used it, and then abandoned it, not replacing the ones that get knocked down, and then by 2017 salvaged everything that was still standing. And what's really interesting is all of those big poles that were put up for them were torn down, yet they were torn down around 2017, right at the same time the city was installing intersection cameras to link to the Central Traffic Services office. I don't know why those couldn't have been reused for the cameras. Now, those interlink devices, while the downtown area used those streetlight standards I just showed, intersections further out from downtown actually put up these big towers. Doesn't look cheap. These towers were put up with the interlink devices in the top of them. And then we'll go back to 2016. You can see there's no intersection camera on it yet. 2017, the city installs the intersection camera. Here it is on the tower. So they're making double use of the tower. By 2018, the interlink devices are gone, but they took the camera off. They abandoned that tower, moving the camera over to this pole, adding this pole for the camera, and then later moved it over here and abandoned the tower and took it completely out. Now, one would think that the tower would certainly give better visibility, holding the camera head higher than any other pole would have. And yet you look at other intersections, like here's Keewatin and Inkster. There's no tower here in 2016. This intersection never did get outfitted with an interlink or a tower. And the city, a lot of the towers that were torn down at other intersections got salvaged and reused, putting them up brand new, as if they were brand new, using them for intersection cameras. So if the tower is the ideal location to place an intersection camera, as it clearly suggests by having installed the tower as brand new just for the camera at this intersection, then why are intersections that have the towers already in place from the interlink devices, the towers aren't used, the cameras are removed and put on separate poles at the intersection? Smaller poles that would be cheaper to install, but for the tower already existing. Why would the city invest in paying to put up these big towers at intersections that never had them to hold the camera, when the smaller pole is clearly ideal, considering intersections that have the tower have it removed? So again, it's just part of this circular function we see. Now, speaking of the smaller units that can hold the cameras, here we have an intersection, and you can see this redundant pole here with the pedestrian head. Again, should have been on this davit all along. Jump ahead a year. Sorry, 2 years, 2018, and they put up found a base pole for a cantilever, putting an extension pole on top of it to hold the camera. Now, I don't understand why. The cantilever uses a bigger base than does the davit, so they tore out that redundant pole from here, put a brand new base here, tore up all this concrete, rewired the pedestrian heads, consolidated them, just to install the camera on this big pole. It's an unnecessarily big pole, requiring that big base. Here's another one. You can see the pedestrian pole right up beside the sidewalk, and now I showed a lot of these redundant poles were being added right beside the sidewalk. Go ahead a year, poles removed. You can see the fresh cement, new base added behind, and this cantilever poles added, holding the intersection camera. And yet, and one more. Again, here's the pedestrian pole holding just that head, and they add the big cantilever base, putting up this extension arm with the intersection camera. And again, it's a bigger than necessary pole. And here's one where I suspect this was done the same era. This is a davit pole. Now, you could have just put up the streetlight standard on a joint use type pole and put the intersection camera on the top of it, like they did with the interlink devices. But instead, they chose to tear out the concrete base, brand new base, big base. You can see the cement's all fresh, and put the extension pole up on top of it to clearly hold the new camera. This was right the year they were first putting them in 16. Then they never installed the camera on it. They took the extension pole, got taken back down, removed, and the camera got installed on the side of this little shaft pole here, showing that these little shaft poles could have held the camera all along. And another location from the same era, and this is an example of, from what I can gather, the department doesn't seem to be organized. They seem to be putting these poles in for future cameras and then not even installing them or installing them on separate poles. Here we have a davit further back off the intersection. It gets torn out, brand new base set. You can see the fresh cement with a cantilever installed, again with an extension pole on top of it clearly for the camera. The camera never got installed on any pole anywhere at this intersection. There's no camera to this day. And there's the new davit unnecessarily put in that when replacing that davit. Now, for when intersection cameras are legitimately and actually installed, there is a pole and they want it higher, they can simply use this type of pole. The cantilever pole has a much bigger base on it, so installing it requires the base to be dug out. Here is a little shaft pole on its base on the boulevard, and you can see the base was reused. They put up a streetlight standard instead of a cantilever pole and holding the intersection camera. Clearly, these poles can hold the cameras, and they use the same base as the davits and cantilevers. You don't need to tear up the base and lay fresh sidewalk and put in the much bigger base that the cantilever pole requires. Easily, you can use these streetlight davits on the existing base. Don't need to be dug up, but yet their preference seems to be digging them up. And this one was just another one where it's on the side. Now, as a comparison example, here's a Toronto intersection with the same kind of camera, same kind of system. And you can see not on a separate pole, not on a taller pole, just bolted to the existing signal pole. And that's what you primarily see in other cities is whatever existing poles are there, the cameras are just added to the side of them. They don't need to dig in these big towers or add these big cantilever poles just to often take them back out. Or in the case of one I just showed, not even put the camera in. So that was inefficiency regarding pole installations, pole moving, all of that kind of stuff. Now I want to talk about pole moving. Here's a joint use pole. You can see the head over the road, bolted to the light standard. This is a street renewal, and you can see they've got a new base set. They're moving it up. This shaft pole is being moved up to the corner. All of the davits, all the poles are being moved at this intersection. Move up to 2018, and you can see that they've moved the joint use pole from there's the hole where it used to be. It's now moved up about 2 feet. And again, there's no pattern of them being moved towards the intersection or further back. And if you go back back to 09, there's the real old joint use that I'd never argue shouldn't have been changed, showing that pole, there it is, brand new in 2012, showing that pole wasn't even that old by 2017. We're looking at an age of it for about 5-6 years before it got moved up 2 feet. And here's another one. Old joint use pole. Base gets torn, and this one, the base gets torn up, and there it is reset up right beside the crosswalk. And this was in 2015. In 2021, this past summer, street renewal comes along, and the whole thing got torn out again, and a brand new pole set, basically back where it originated. Broadway in Maryland. This is another very old joint use pole. You can see it's on a square base, which are the older ones. Many of them are still around today. 2008, it got torn up, and there's the brand new base set beside the garbage can, new joint use. Then in 2016, when they added the bike lane on this side of the road, 2020, the same pole gets torn up again. There's the gravel spot and moved a little bit closer to the sidewalk. And this was done in association with the bike lane being added, but it was on the opposite side of the intersection. There's no reason to be doing work here. The bike lane was over there. That pole was never in the way. And I can clearly show it was only a few years old. And again, there's no pattern. Like the ones I just showed where the poles are moved towards the crosswalk. Here's one where the joint use pole's a little further back. This one got split. And, sorry. I'm going to skip that one, running out of time. Here's one where the joint use pole is near the intersection, right in front of the control cabinet, and then during a street renewal, it gets torn up and moved. There's the old base. This one gets moved further back from the intersection. So again, you can't. There's no room to argue. While they're consistently moving them towards the intersection because the engineers in prior years didn't know what they were doing and shouldn't have installed them 4 feet back from the intersection. No, there's in some cases like this one, they're putting them even further back than they were originating. Again, it's the pattern of wherever the pole was, they'll put it somewhere else. And again, it's regardless of age, even poles that are very new. And again here, now this is a joint use pole. This one wasn't moved. This is what is called a splitting of a joint use. And again, they put it further back. There's the original joint use pole still standing there holding the street light. And they've added this cantilever pole behind it. Again, moving everything further back from the intersection. Here's another joint use pole. Same pattern. There's the new davit. Now here's the opposite. Here's a joint use pole that's very close to the intersection. And somehow they found a way to split it and put the davit even closer to the intersection. Here's the joint use pole that was split during a street renewal. The original pole is still standing. There's the new one moved further up. Now you'd say that that's a good placement for the pedestrian head. It used to be over there on that pedestrian pole. And they have the pedestrian head right above the sidewalk, and then they moved it to the opposite side of the same pole. This one you probably recognize from the Free Press article. Going back, here's the original joint use pole. You can see very old, I shouldn't say very old, but it's an older green one painted. A street renewal happened in 2016 and they tore it up. So looking at it dead on here, here it is before the renewal. You can see that the joint use pole is to the left of the crosswalk. Then they moved it up a few feet and put it in front of the crosswalk, remaining at joint use. Then they came back in 2019 and split it. You can see the street lights pretty much in the same place that was moved to in 16, and the new cantilevers added, basically back where the original joint use was before 2016, pretty much right back where it was. And here's one where it seems grossly inefficient. This is a joint use. And you can see it's right beside the sidewalk, push button, everything right there. This one was split into 3 different poles. So they took the push button off, moved it over 2 feet and put it onto its own pole, and then added a davit behind it. And there's the hole in the former joint use pole where the arm used to be bolted. Now, if this pole was rusted out, then it should have just been changed. It shouldn't have had to be all split like that. And that's often what is done. But this, and clearly the pole wasn't too rusted because it's still there now, holding just the street light. This one is an older joint use pole, and they split it and just clogged this corner up with poles. And the original joint use pole remains where it was. And here's an example of if a joint use pole is too old, here's what you should do with it. This is one that may have been rusted out. You simply just change it, and there it is changed. So just showing how things can be done right. Okay, so that's moving and splitting of joint use. Now I'm transitioning to moving davits and cantilevers. So Century and Wellington. This was an old joint use. Here it is. It's quite a ways back, and I would agree that this is pretty far back to use a joint use, but that's how they originally built it. So they split it. The original joint use stays, and they put this davit right here at the corner, and taking all the signal heads off of the former joint use. Jump ahead a few more years. They've now torn it up. You can see the sidewalks all disturbed there, and took it out from beside the sidewalk and moved it over here now, which was already a new pole from when they split the joint use just a couple years earlier. And it shows this pattern of there isn't an actual standard. Here's a davit on the sidewalk, and I was showing a lot of those redundant poles being placed right at the sidewalk, push button right beside the crosswalk. Seems ideal. dug it out, moved it off the sidewalk. The opposite side of that corner had a shaft pole. That one was off the sidewalk. So you can see here, the davits beside the crosswalk, the shaft pole's off the crosswalk. You jump ahead and they're flipped. Now the davit that was beside the crosswalk is now behind it, and the shaft pole that was behind it is now on. So again, I'll go back to before the work was done. 2014, davit on the sidewalk, shaft pole behind the sidewalk. Go ahead 2 years, davit off the sidewalk, shaft pole on the sidewalk, showing this pattern of it doesn't matter how it's built, it'll just simply be reversed. And another one, davit off the sidewalk, now on the sidewalk. No, there's no push button or anything there. Again, just off, on, off. It's just back and forth. This one was right on the corner. I just showed ones where they put the new davit right on the corner. That one got moved off. Then they had the pedestrian head on the left side. Then they moved it to the right side. Here's another example of a reversal. The davit's behind the sidewalk here. Then they moved it, they dug it out, moved it onto the sidewalk. Then years later, came back, dug it back out again. You can see the fresh cement and put it back right where it began all along. I'm sure everybody gets the point. I'll just pick out a couple of the really grotesque examples. This is Elgin and Keewatin. You can see this standard right in the corner here. This is called a double davit. It's holding for the whole crosswalk. Jump ahead, and you can see this whole intersection got rebuilt. They moved the crosswalk further down from the intersection and restricted traffic from crossing it, so it's only cyclists now that can cross the intersection. So not making any issue with that. So you can see when they split it all up around 2013, they pulled out the double davit and replaced it with 2 brand new davits. Then a street renewal comes along, and here it is in progress. You can see they've already set a brand new base here, and this black piping is the conduit that they use to run signaling wire through. And jump up the next year, and the poles that were both on the north side are now on the south side. Now, if you want to argue, well, the push buttons should be consistently on the right of the crosswalk for an entering pedestrian, or you want to argue that the pole should be on the far side of the sidewalk to put the heads further back for cars to see them better. Well, if that's the case, then these poles would be staggered diagonally across. They wouldn't both be on the north side and then turn into a mirror image and both jump to the south side. Again, it's just a reversal of how it was built. In this case, these poles are only a few years old. And another one further back, moved the pole up, took out the redundant pole. Here's one from just last summer. You can see it's a very new pole, shiny silver one, not the old green painted. You can see it's a little bit further back. Changed it to a cantilever, moved it up. And the same pattern happens with shaft poles. Here's one that's further back, moved up. Here's one that's further back, changed it to a brand new one. Base looks pretty new too, but I can't say for sure, but you can see brand new shiny pole. Then they tore it out and moved it up. Here's an intersection that didn't have, this is a brand new install. So here's the intersection in 2009 before it even has signalization. Go to early 2012, and you can see they put that pole quite a bit further back from the intersection. So within a year of putting it in, they dug it out and moved it up to the crosswalk. Jump forward a few years, dug it back out, moved it back where it was originally. Nothing else changes. Same thing here. You can see this is originally a davit holding the head over the road. Now, interestingly, a lot of the patterns you see are these davits are actually often put in new, and the shaft poles are what's being taken out. In this case, they took out the davit, put in the shaft pole, holding it on the side here, right in front of the hydro pole. So you can see the old display was, old pole was here. They moved it just in front of the hydro pole in 2018. Then the street renewal happens in 2020. They come back, dug it out, and moved it another couple feet forward. The pole that they had just put in the year or two before. And here it is in progress. Here's where the pole was, and they've just moved it to here, moving that one back a few feet. This one, there's the old and there's the new. That one's just moving over diagonally about a foot or two. Here's one. This is the old base that's about to come out. They got the temporary davit on it for the construction. You can see how close together. There's how far they're moving that. And you can see there's nothing wrong with those bases. Both those bases look to be about the same age. This one's obviously the newer one. This one is very new looking. And they're like a foot or so apart. And that's what they do. Whenever there's a street renewal, every pole will be moved. So pedestrian heads are the same thing. You can see this one here is right beside the sidewalk or at the intersection. They just moved it back 3 feet. You can see all the fresh cement there from where it's dug out. This one's further back. Street renewal happened in 2019. That one they moved forward, the exact opposite of the one I just showed. This one, if you look back here, these heads used to be consolidated. And clearly they didn't like this pedestrian head being this far off from the sidewalk. So they took the head off and added this second pole over here. So there it is. And then they took it out again and moved it here to convergence and took the second head off this pole and put it over there. So to go over it, 16 is consolidated. 17, the new pedestrian poles behind the sidewalk. 18, they dig the brand new pole out and move it in front of the sidewalk. And last one. That one's further back. Dig it out, moved right up to the corner. Okay, so that's pole moving. Now I just want to talk a little bit about changing the types of the poles. So there's a little bit more here. Is everybody still with me?
Yes.
Yes.
I realize this is a lot to take in. I'm just sitting here thinking.
Go back.
Sorry?
With recording, we'll be able to go back. Jason, you
Yeah.
have your hand up. You want to quickly ask a question? We're trying to hold questions to the end.
I could take a question quickly, though.
Sure. And I mean, I'm sure everyone's got questions. I just have a couple of questions, but one is, you see, it's one thing for us, Chris, to listen to your presentation, for us to watch, and then ask questions of the administration. My concern, Chris, is that you are so in deep and so well researched that I hope we can organize this to be able to get a proper accounting just based on your questions alone. We all have to keep an open mind and see what they have, kind of reasonings they have. But I'm wondering, would Chris himself have the opportunity, given his incredible insights here, to how much can he assist in asking questions of the administration on this? Because I hope we can get Chris's research, all his presentation straight to ourselves. I'm just putting it out there. Like, how can we do this to optimize this presentation, optimize all Chris's research, to optimize getting the accounting from the administration?
That's a very good question, and I obviously don't have the answer, but I would love to sit down for an afternoon with the administration. I've been hoping for that all along. So if somebody can organize that, I would be very appreciative, because a lot of this stuff is guesswork and reading manuals. And to tell you the truth, some of my questions, I've been having to email engineers from other cities to get answers. So other cities have really been answering a lot of my questions. A lot of these things were figured out by asking the other cities, or in this case here, the highways department was especially helpful in providing answers, because it's just very hard to get a meeting with the city here. So I would love that opportunity.
Okay. So the question is, for us councillors, like, what can we do to optimize this without falling
Oh,
short.
I see what you're saying.
You know, it's all very well. We get this excellent. I mean, of course, we'll be able to have papers and points in front of us. You know, for those of us, apparently, it's going to be coming to the Standing Committee on Finance. Is it not, John? We'll be. Scott Gillingham sent me a text saying that this issue is going to be coming to the Finance Committee. I assumed it would be going to Public Works as well. But I mean, I feel inadequate at this point. Of course, I'm going to be reviewing the recording of this.
Mm-hmm.
But I just don't. Why would I pretend I have as much insight as Chris is to make this work, to sort of optimize all this knowledge to get a proper accounting from administration? I just feel that. Oh, I don't know.
Jason,
that will be inadequate. I'll leave it at that.
Jason, I'll just jump in. Let's get Chris to finish his presentations. As far as political and next steps, I know that Councillor Allard is trying to do something tomorrow at council. I know Councillor Gillingham's trying to do something with finance. So it's still all up in the air as to who wants to chew on this bone. So let's just get through this presentation and maybe ask some pointed questions at the end. If whoever's still here, use the chat for those that may be at a desktop to put some questions in they have that are in the queue. Chris, please do continue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so you can see here, I'm almost done this section. There's only a couple pages, or sorry, a page left. So conversion to cantilever arms. That's a whole nother subject. Starting in 2014, the city started using what's called a cantilever arm, and I've referenced them as we've seen them so far. The difference really is they're just aesthetically different. The cantilever is a perfectly straight vertical pole that holds an arm straight over the road. The davit is a curved arm. The city traditionally always used davits, and then starting in 2014, the city is now began using both styles of poles, although the cantilever now seems to be the preference. And a lot of what we're seeing is conversions from davits to cantilevers, and ironically, we still sometimes see brand new builds going up with davits. So it's just become another thing now of a way that this department's interchangeably moving stuff around, because now we've just added cantilevers to the mix. So I'm going to go through the same hierarchy I did with the other standards, where I start off with joint use. So cantilevers first arrived on the scene in 2014, but Winnipeg clearly didn't have joint use cantilevers. So to use an example here, this is a cantilever standard. You can see it's a perfectly straight pole with an arm bolted going straight. I sometimes call them the upside down L poles, or the double ones of T poles. So this intersection is a brand new build in 2016. And you can see it's all cantilevers. But the joint use pole here, you can see the street light's not even installed yet in the top. It's brand new. That is a davit style arm. It's curved. Now, when the city first started using cantilevers in 2014, it appears that for 2014, 2015, 2016, they did not have joint use cantilever arms. They only had cantilever standards, but being the whole thing, but all the joint use arms they put up in those 3 years were still davit style. They still put up davit poles, but anytime there was a joint use, they still used the curved davit arm. I'm guessing the city just didn't have them yet in stock. So this is a brand new build you can see in 2016 with a cantilever style pole on the boulevard and a davit joint use arm. Jump ahead a year, and 2017 is when the city seemed to get the cantilever style joint use arms, and they seemed to spend the summer going around the city changing out all of the davit arms that they had just put in the 3 years for joint use. Now, there's a lot of joint use davit arms still around, but they seemed to target the ones that they'd had to put in. So ironically, the absolute newest of the davit arms, they spent 2017 going around and changing. Now, further showing that this pole wasn't simply hit by a car, there's the putty hole in it where the wires came through back when the curved arm was on it. And this is all across the city. All of the joint use arms put up in those 3 years were then changed as soon as the city got the cantilever arms. And then since, the older ones, they seem to change them every chance they get. Now I FIPA'd this one and have asked the department why, and the only answer they've given is for symmetry, for aesthetic purposes. They want the intersection to be the same style of pole, so they changed all these ones around the city because the intersections were otherwise cantilever, other than those joint use arms. I don't think anybody really cares, considering the other inconsistencies I've shown. That should be the lowest on the radar. It certainly has nothing to do with road safety, and especially ironic, existing intersections that have davit poles at them, that still have davit poles today, they'll add a joint use arm, often putting in an intersection camera or something, and they always use cantilever arms. So they have no problem mixing in cantilever arms at intersections otherwise built with davits, but going the other way, an intersection with cantilevers that had a stray davit arm, they went around and changed them all in 2017. Now, while we're on this intersection, this has nothing to do with my work, but I'm just going to take the chance to show you guys something else. When I flag poles being moved, which I'm about to show, or have already shown, when I flag that, it's only when the geometry of the intersection doesn't otherwise change and it's clear that the base, the bolts didn't shear off or something didn't happen. It's typically when it can be tied to other things like a street renewal or something like that. But another thing is if the geometry of the intersection changes, otherwise justifying the changing or moving of the poles, that is work that I don't flag because that's necessary. Here's an example of work they did that wasn't flagged as unnecessary signal work because it was made necessary, but I still would otherwise question the route change. This intersection was built brand new in 16. You can see all the fresh concrete in the corners, the fresh tactiles, the fresh pavement. This is summer of 16. It's not even in service yet. You see how these two poles are very close together. If you jump ahead, right after it was built, the tactile gets torn out and the crosswalk gets moved north a little bit, causing this entire line of poles to also be torn out and moved. So again, the intersection's built brand new in 16, and before that it was unsignalized. It was just a stop sign. You can see it's all the old concrete. So 16 comes along, they build this brand new sidewalk with the tactiles, put in all these brand new signal poles, only to go back a year later and then move the crosswalk to the north and move all the signal poles and put in all new cement again. That's a pattern that I'm seeing all over the city. And there are issues where the signal pole moving actually isn't flagged as redundant or unnecessary because it's made necessary by the concrete work. But I question the root need for changing the concrete, or if that's a better way of designing it, why wasn't it built that way the year before? These are questions for my next project that I'm just not even into yet. But I just thought, since we were at this intersection, throw you an example of what I'm looking into now. So, going back to the changing of these joint use arms, here's Sherbrooke and Portage. This intersection was renewed in 2016. You can see it's changed to cantilever arms, and this one had two joint use arms. So if you go back to 15, here's the original joint use pole. This is an old trolley pole. It's the old round one. You can see the joint use arm bolted to it. Changed to a brand new shiny davit during the street renewal of 16. There it is with the curved davit style arm. And then in 17, the city gets their joint use cantilever arms, and this is another one that they went to, and now there's the cantilever arm, and there's the putty hole the putty in the hole that's patched from the wiring back when it was a davit. And over on this corner, original pole. Sorry. Davit style joint use, cantilever style joint use, same pole. Same deal. This happened all over the city. This was basically a 2017 project for the department. And here's another one. This is from this past summer. This is a joint use pole, davit style arm. This one was never changed because this was an intersection that otherwise was davits. And you can see this is a camera pole that was stuck in, and this is the joint use arm, cantilever style. 2021 rolls along. They're doing a street renewal, and just like the others, there's the markings in the pole where the davit arm was, and changed it to a cantilever style. So it's just a pattern that they seem to like these cantilevers and change them at every opportunity. And the only explanation FIPA's given me is that the department likes them better. They like the look of them. They're shinier, maybe. So now we go to cantilever style standards. So I showed joint use poles. The other pattern we're seeing is while the department is still using both size and style of poles, being davits versus cantilevers, a lot of cases they will, when street renewals happen, they'll change from davits to cantilevers. Here's an example of an intersection that had brand new davits. These were, you can see these are very new. They're very shiny. They're not the old green ones. There's an older one on that far side of that corner. That's a joint use pole. There's an older green one. There's an older green shaft pole. But this one here is a very new davit. Street renewal is done in 2021 on Wellington down here, and they used the opportunity to not only tear it out, but move it behind the sidewalk and change it to the cantilever. And again, the only difference between these poles is aesthetic, and they still use both of them today. There's not a danger with davits. And now 2020 Cordon Street renewal. Here's a corridor. You can see very new shiny davit. Had very recently been changed. Street renewal comes along and they changed it to cantilevers. Now they put the side mount beacons up, which I am very much in favor of, and it's been a separate fight of mine, and there's a lot more to be said on that issue. But you can see that basically in the exact same place the davit was, they've changed it, and the cantilevers actually use larger bases than davits. So if we go back here, you can see there's the davit, and they changed the base, dug it right up, tore it out, brand new cantilever. And there's the opposite side. There's the cantilever pole as it stands now, and there's the former davit from a couple years before. And you can see everything's very new here. The tactile's already in place. The standards are shiny. The only improvement I would argue we needed was to have added poles on the boulevard here, putting these heads over the road, but we did not need to tear these out. Cordon and Elm. Here we don't even have a crosswalk yet. This is a signed crosswalk. This is 2012. Around 2013 they build it with davits. Here it is with davits. Then they come along again, tear them out, and then put in cantilevers on this side. They were already new. Grant and Waverly. You can see davit, very new, very shiny. They were rebuilding Waverly coming up here. You can see the sidewalk. None of this stuff moves, but they do rebuild the intersection from that side, change the sidewalk, but they don't otherwise change anything that required moving poles, and change it from a davit to a cantilever, putting it also on a new base. So there it is in 17, brand new, and there's the davit. You see how this davit's just a few feet over from the curb, and now the cantilever is slightly closer. So they did change the base and just move it a hair's distance closer to the road. And this one is the same deal. Brand new davit. This intersection was actually not even in existence in 2009. You can see it's stop sign controlled. Around 2011, brand new build. Here's the davit, shiny pole. They add a bike lane 5 years later in 2017 and used as an opportunity to dig the davit up, put a new base in, change it to a cantilever. And there it is. And this was done in 2017. Now, while we're doing this, if I'm going to show, I don't have a link for it, so I'm just going to go to it myself. Pegwith Street in Transcona was a stop sign controlled intersection. Now I FIPA'd the department on why they changed a lot of these davits to cantilevers, and the only answer they gave me through FIPA was that they like the cantilevers better. They said that it's their preferred style of pole and they consider it their standard practice to change davits to cantilevers. I forget exactly how the FIPA was worded, but they simply just said it was their preference of the time, being in that case 2018 on that particular intersection, to change the poles from davits to cantilevers, and in this case even if they're very new. But in contradiction of that, if you go back here, 2016, this intersection is not even built yet. You can see it's a brand new intersection, stop sign controlled. They added the signals around 2018 and built it with brand new davits. The exact pole that are very new, and they're tearing them out at other intersections. They're installing they were at the same time we're installing brand new at intersections such as this. Now, that's it for davits and cantilevers. Shaft pole heights. Remember the little shaft poles I was talking about? Starting around 2013-ish, the city seems to have now liked not putting vehicle heads on top of the pole. So here's an old shaft pole that has the vehicle head on top of it. Around 2011, they changed it to a new one. There's the brand new shaft pole with the head sits on top of it. As they were installing countdowns or just whenever they work, every opportunity, they seem to like to change them to this style of pole now. These ones are about 3 feet taller and they hold the head on the side of them instead of having the head in the top. The head's at about the exact same place, but now it sits on top. But in many cases, the poles they're changing are already very new. They just seem to prefer. And the interesting thing that I've uncovered is while they were changing existing poles with the head on top to having the head on the side, they were actually, up until 2018, still installing the older ones with the head on top. So they were doing installs of ones with heads on top while simultaneously changing out newer ones with the heads on top to have the head on the side. And the head's still in about the exact same place. And sometimes the poles are taller. Here's a taller shaft pole. This is an older one. A lot of times on the main road, the city would use I think this is about a 15-foot shaft. They would use the taller shaft pole and strap the heads to the side, and they have a bit of a top extension over and above. A lot of these, they've been going around and changing them to the style they're using now. This one's a little shorter. So in the past, the city used the short pole with the head on the top, or the tall pole with the head in the side with a little bit of a top sticking above. Now they're using the medium shaft, and every chance they get, they seem to change out the small shaft and the tall shaft to the medium shaft. And this is an example of a tall to a medium. And this seemed to be associated with the project of when they were changing all these heads out. These are 8812 heads. I'm going to talk about these in a different part of this presentation. But they had a project to change out all of the 8812s. And it seems while they were doing that, they were also changing the poles. And what we see is often the pattern around the whole intersection, not at this particular one, where they'll all go at the same time. Here's a tall shaft. Head gets changed in 16. Now a medium shaft. Here is a short shaft with the head on the top. And I advocated for this in 2016. It was about a 7-year battle that I had with the department. I was arguing that at T intersections where there's a right turn channel and there's no crosswalk to the left, that the displays should be a flashing left pointing arrow. I argued that for years. The department finally agreed with me in 2016, going around changing them, and then changed them all. But this is one that they changed. You can see that this is a short shaft with the head sitting on top, but instead of just changing the head to have a left turn arrow, they changed the whole pole. And there it is. It went from a short shaft with the head on top to the medium shaft with the head strapped to the side. Now, you might say, well, maybe that one got hit by a car, but it didn't. It's a pattern across the city. Even if it got hit by a car, the breakaways are designed to snap, the pole would be stood back up. But even if that's not enough evidence, I submit this. There they are doing it. I happen to be driving by. Jefferson and McPhillips. Again, you see tall shaft. Now it's the medium shaft. You can see there's no extension above the head there. And this one was done at the same time. See, the sign was above it before. And that one, I believe that one was done too. There's the tall shaft, there's the medium shaft. The bases didn't move, so they went to this intersection and just changed them all at the same time. Other than one by the looks of it. And this one I'm going to show lastly. Here we have short shafts. You can see the head on top. There's a tall shaft there. 2020, they changed the heads and they changed the tall shaft to a medium shaft and all the short shafts to mediums. You can see the heads you can see the head was screwed to the top. And now all the heads are strapped to the side, but they're still at about the same height. They're just sticking out now, strapped to the side instead of sitting on top. So the placement's really no different. Changing arm lengths. Now, sometimes it's an improvement, but what I'm arguing is that the department really should be surveying intersections and putting up the appropriate size pole to begin with. So here's a T-pole, a double cantilever, And you can see how this arm's really long on it. Holds the head out right over this lane. The department put it in brand new when they built the Keniston extension, and then went back later and changed it from a long arm to a short arm. So there's the long arm, there's the short arm. Now, I'm not debating whether it should be a long or short. I'm simply saying that whatever it should have been that all along. The department should know which type of arm is best to put at a location and not have to go back and undo its own work. And we see the same thing with davits. Here's a medium length davit, and they went in and changed it to a longer davit. I should say that was a short length. That was a short davit. This is the medium length davit with the length over the road. And again, if it should have been that length all along, then it should have been that length all along. Okay, that's it for moving poles, changing poles, all of that. As a wind up to this section, we're almost done. I am just now want to show a couple of incidental things that really aren't related to poles. They were tacked on, but they didn't really fit with anything else, so I'm just going to use this one. This is the intersection of Corden and Harrow. You can see here, this is the old EM controller, electromechanical controller. These ones are now extinct, but they had a little dial in them, and they were completely mechanical in comparison to the computerized ones we have now. I call them, personally, I just refer to them as the clunkers. They made a lot of noise. If you're standing beside them, you'd hear them clunk every time the lights changed. It was basically just a spinning dial with ticks on it that would make the light change when as the ticks went around. These were pretty much made extinct around 2012-ish is when a lot of them went. So this is right in the corner here. Now, I'm not arguing that it didn't need to go. But the department, it used to be on the corner here. So actually, I should go back and show again. So there's the clunker on the corner. The clunker gets changed out to a computerized controller. It's gone. There's the brand new controller now. Now, there's nothing wrong with that work. I don't know if there's necessary to really move it that far, but I'm not arguing against doing that work. So here it is in 2017. Now you can see there's the new control cabinet. 2020, Corden's renewed. Watch the control cabinet. You see how we're looking dead at this pine tree? See how the control cabinet's on the left side of the pine tree? Now it's a little bit to the right. They just moved it a few feet. Whenever street renewals are done, this is a pattern. Wherever the control cabinet is, it tends to move. It's about 75% of the time, they will move the control cabinet, even ones that are very new. Now that is a major undertaking. That requires setting a new base and moving and rewiring all of the underground wiring, because that control cabinet, that's like the hub. That is the heart of the intersection. That thing's controlling every signal display, which is every pole at this intersection is wired to that cabinet. Moving that cabinet just a few feet means all that wire has to now be extended and moved. Here's another one. You see the pole's the cabinet's not necessarily in the way. This is Corden and Shaftesbury just before the during the 2018 renewal. You can see it's kind of in the grassy area here with the leaves around it. This is 2018. Jump ahead, poof, the cabinet's gone. It moved over to this corner. So I showed you one where it moved a few feet. This one just jumped the entire road, went over to this side. And again, we're not seeing a pattern of where they're going closer to the intersection, further from the intersection. Sometimes they're in the way for like if a turn lane's added, but that's very rare. They just move them. Here's another one. Right here. That one jumped. Sorry. That one jumped back. So it was here, jumped back. McDermott and Sherbrooke. This one was a clunker just a few years before. 2018, they did a street renewal. You can see it's here kind of to the right side. You can see here's the hydro pole. There's the tree, and you can see it's kind of in alignment between the tree and the davit. Jump ahead, brand new davits. This is one of the intersections they didn't change the cantilevers, and you can see the control cabinet moved a little bit further away from the intersection. So going back, there it is originally. You can see it's looking at this view, it's kind of between the hydro pole and the tree. Jump ahead. Let's see if I can get that vantage point again. You can see now it was between this tree and the hydro pole originally, so it was around here. It just jumped back a few feet. I know it's marginal, but it's a major undertaking. There's another one. You see how this one's further back a bit there. There's a cap on the hole where it was. Right there, the hole's capped, and they just moved it back a few feet. You can see all this limestone from where they had to dig the cement up to do it. Here's one this one's right in the corner. There's the cap on the hole where it was, and there it is now. Every chance that there's a renewal, they just move them. This one, you can see, and by the way, this jumps back to our earlier work. You can see this is a street renewal. Every pole is being moved. You can see all these new bases are just marginal distances in some cases from the existing. Wherever the pole is, it's going to go somewhere else. You can see the control cabinet on the boulevard here, and that's a perfectly good, ideal place for it. It's right out of the way. And then we come along, and here they are actually doing it. There's the new base. You can see all this gravel from where they dug the cement up. And they are moving it to put it in front of the Olive Garden window so we can look at it while we're eating supper. And there's the crew doing it. And we'll jump ahead to 18, and there it is in front of the Olive Garden window, and there's a bald spot in the grass where it was. So that's control cabinet moving. Now, just to give you an idea of how much you're only getting a condensed form of what I've actually tracked, let me just show, I showed you my 96-page raw document of raw data. That is actually not in the raw data for that particular file because the raw data looks at the signal poles, the signal heads, all of that stuff. So I'm going to just show you an entirely different raw data file that I actually didn't open at the start of this presentation. Traffic signal accessories. Here is the list of intersections starting here where they have moved the control cabinets that I've tracked. And there's the intersection cameras. There's the overhead actuation. And here's the towers they've added, removed, grays removed. Here's all of those coordination antennas I showed earlier. These are all taken out now, but there's where they were. Just to give you an idea of the fact that I've only done 75% of the city is this deep analysis. We're almost done this part. So inefficient construction methods. I showed you Keewatin Street and Kinver when we were there for other stuff, so we can skip that one. Check out this though. There seems to be a lack of planning on the part of this department. They don't seem to know their own projects. So what happens is poles will be set right in the middle of where something's about to be built. So this intersection was a new build in 2012 with Davits. In 2016, they're adding a bike lane. So we can jump ahead now. Here it is in 15, just before the bike lane. August of 16, the bike lane was added on this side, over here on the west side. And you can see they've added brand new bases here because they're moving the crosswalk from here up, and they're basically rebuilding this whole intersection for the bike lanes and to create a bike crossing here. So let's jump up now. So this is August of 16. You can see the new basis. We go to, let's see if I can get a September of 16. Bad view. Anyways, okay. So there's the new basis. They just set them. This is August of 16. Here is September of 16. And now the davit's gone. You can see the gravel. And there's the brand new cantilever on that base. But the weird thing is as part of the same project, they're moving this crosswalk north. They're building the bike lane on that side. It's all part of the same project. They built the bike lane on this side in 16, and this side got done in 17. So they just set this brand new cantilever right here. The bike lane's about to go there. That's the entire reason for this project, is they're prepping for the bike lane. Here they are in the summer of 17, building the bike lane, and there's that cantilever pole they had just put in. Jump ahead another year. Now the bike lane goes right through where they had just put the cantilever during the construction, and they had to move it and put a longer arm on it. So again, here it is in 17, just put in during the construction, only to have to tear it out and move it because somebody didn't plan it out, and they ended up building the bike lane right through the middle of where it was. And another one, last one for that. Here's an older shaft pole, 16. 17, they redo the road. They're redoing the road. They changed it from a tall shaft to a medium shaft, but the tall shaft in this case was older, so I'm not disputing that. And you can see that it is older concrete. 18 comes along. They tore out the shaft pole. You see it's on a square base here. So this is the older square base. They tear it out and put it on a round base. This is 18, and you can see they redid the entire boulevard, changed all brand new curbs, and went from grass to gravel. This is 18. Then they went back a year later in 19, tore it out again. Sorry, this is 19 when they're actually doing it, so we'll jump ahead to after it's done. Tore it out again, and then put in a cantilever and tore up all those brand new curbs you just saw. The whole boulevard got torn up within a year of being brand new, and then they changed it to the solid concrete instead of the gravel in the middle. Now, lastly, Pembina Highway in the south perimeter. When they do construction, you often have to do what's called temporary traffic signals. So that's temporary traffic control. So here is Pembina in the south perimeter. Now, what they were doing is they were doing work on the top of this overpass, and as part of that, they closed this on-ramp to go from southbound Pembina onto eastbound Perimeter Highway. So this is 2012. We jump ahead to 2014, and you can see that the on-ramp's closed. They're actually working on it. They're paving it. As a detour, they decided to have everybody turn left and go onto this on-ramp. But to control traffic, the city actually put in a full-blown signalized intersection. There's the control cabinets. There's all the davits. This is just before cantilevers came along. It would have been cantilevers, I'm sure, had they been using them yet. So here we are in the summer of 14, and you can see they've got this full-blown intersection. Now, they didn't need to do this. This is excessive. You jump ahead another to 15, and it's all gone. They spent a pile of money putting in all these bases, putting in all these permanent davits with all the underground wiring, basically building it as if it were a permanent intersection, only to have to come back a year later and tear it all back out, pull out all that underground wiring, and it's a pattern. Here's another example. Taylor and Waverly. 2017, they're prepping to build this overpass for the railway. And there's the temporary standards they're putting in, and they're actually putting in the more expensive cantilevers now on bigger bases for the temporary signals. Here they are in operation. So the roads, you can see they're putting the permanent signals in, cantilever style, over here as this intersection is being built, and there's the temporary ones. You jump ahead another year and they're gone. It's just a big on-ramp and a bunch of grass where they were. So these always were just temporary signals. Yet instead of putting in just a temporary install, they put in these permanent bases with full cantilevers, everything wired underground. Now, you're probably wondering, well, what should they have done? Well, as a contrast, take a look at this. This is a permanent install of a streetlight standard. Just like how a permanent install of traffic signals looks. You see, it's steel pole, all underground wiring. But you don't put in steel poles and underground wiring for a temporary install. And here's what Hydro does. This is a temporary streetlight. It's on a wooden pole with an overhead wire with an arm just bolted to the pole. That's what temporary traffic signals should look like. A wiring above ground on wooden poles. And that's not, I'm not that good at coming up with new ideas. I'm not that creative. This is done everywhere else. Here's an example. Here's a temporary traffic signal in London, Ontario, when this intersection is being rebuilt. You can see what they've done. They've set wooden poles, screwed all the heads to wooden poles, run wires above the road, run this cabling along. You can see it's all wired from above ground with all the heads just hanging from wires on wooden poles. Way cheaper than doing a permanent-like install. That's not London. Here's one from Toronto. Same deal. You can see there's the signals are all out. They're rebuilding this whole intersection, and these are what's called span-hung traffic signals, just hanging from wires with the cables run along the wire and hanging off wooden poles. That's what should be done for a temporary install, not this full-blown intersection. In this case, even going above with now putting in cantilevers instead of davits. And that's the last example I have in respect to part one. And I am done now here. So I'd like to take a break. Does anybody have anything to say?
There's lots to say. I don't know what to say. I'm going to need to talk with you guys again later, but this is excellent.
I'm running out of breath. Can we take about 5 or 10 minutes?
Yeah, just how much more time do you need for this presentation?
Well, that's what I was just wondering. If you guys are interested in this, do you think, would it be better to just maybe postpone the rest of it and we can all just take a breather and think and absorb?
That's fine with me.
I see Councillor Nason with his hand up here. Councillor Nason, did you have comment?
Yeah, I'm okay taking a break or whatever. I had a specific question about, it was quite a while ago. There was a specific example of a specific signal at a street called Annabella.
And Higgins. Yep.
Yeah. There was great pride among some people around the city about adding in the bike-friendly signal activization. So I know this intersection because I run through there a lot. So
yes.
It clearly there was a signal added in post fact. There's a signal added in at some point. Some people took great pride in this. So I think it's not all on one big pole. True, but people's priorities changed over time. They wanted this added in for cyclists. It got grafted in. I remember sort of being startled because suddenly it appeared one year. So I think that's an example of one. And I mean, as Jason said, you'd have to wade through a lot of this, but I just thought, well, there's one where somebody wanted it added in right away. Create that cyclist access signal. So thoughts on that?
May I answer that?
Yeah, I'm asking a question.
What you're referring to is cyclist actuation. They didn't add special heads for the cyclist, they added actuation, and that was the addition of push buttons for cyclist actuation. So cyclists wouldn't be stuck at it because the loops under the road, they're not sensitive enough to pick up cyclists, and cyclists wouldn't want to have to park their bike and go walk over and push the pedestrian button. So you're talking about the addition of push buttons for cyclists. The corner that I showed with that redundant pole and head was the northeast corner. The cyclist button for southbound is actually on the northwest corner. So where that addition was made was on the opposite side of the corner from what I showed. What I showed was the vehicle head on a shaft pole. That was put in 2006. The cycling button you're referring to was put in 2016, much later and on the opposite side of the intersection.
Actually, what I'm talking about is more what I'm familiar with it is at the southeast corner. That's as I come running up from City Hall. I like that stretch there. So I use that. I activate it off the pedestrian thing. But I mean, it probably was added in after the fact, a separate pole. But politically, somebody wanted that added in. They wanted that cycle activation. So I don't know about all of these. I don't know, and a lot of these aren't, a lot of these are very detailed, and I appreciate that. But I just thought, well, there's one, there's an intersection I actually know.
Well, here it is in 2021. What you're referring to is right here. You see where I'm zoomed in? You see that push button?
Yes.
That was added in 2016.
Right. Okay.
And so was this one. The redundant pole I was showing was not on either of those corners. It was this one here. This one's a constant. This goes back. You see, this intersection was rebuilt around 2006. There it is in 2006. The push button you're referring to was added around 2016 off the top of my head. There it is in 16 and it's yellow. Go back a little further. Okay, I guess this one was a little older. It's not there yet in 12. So, but you can see this is the northwest corner and the push button's not added yet. The redundant pole I was pointing out was this one, which is on the opposite side. There was no cyclist push button here because to put a push button here for a cyclist, it would be for a cyclist on Higgins. But a cyclist on Higgins doesn't need a push button because Higgins is the side of that intersection that has what's called a resting green, meaning that the lights default to green on Higgins. So there's no need for a cyclist push button here. So that's why I use this side of the corner as opposed to this side, because I did consider the cyclist push button. Push buttons in general, including cyclists, are considerations in my research.
Okay, but they appear to have grafted on the cycles button onto an existing pole then over there on
They did,
on
and
Southeast. Okay.
that was very good on them to have done that for this particular one. But that's why I didn't use this side of the corner as an example of a redundant pole. I was using this side, which isn't in no way affected by the push button.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I know the city very well, so in most of these cases, I pretty much know what we're talking about. If that makes sense. I just, when you go to this depth of an analysis of the city's signalized intersections, it's kind of just sticks with you.
Sure, and I mean, I'd want the staff to respond on the whole discussion about the interlink system and was it never used? I don't know. I would want the staff to respond to that. You were saying you thought it was never used. I don't know. I know there was great pride and excitement when there was money put into the budget about the new control center and
yes,
much camera addition out of that. So some of that may have been grafted on after the fact, after some of these intersections were done. But we can certainly ask about whatever the interlink system was and whether it was ever used or what happened there.
One thing I'll say about the interlink system is I don't know. I was posing a theory, and you're actually the first people to have seen that. That was never shown to the Free Press or any of the experts because it's not something I'm rock solid on. It's a theory I was presenting in addition to everything else. It's actually on the list of questions I just really am dying to know from the department. That one's more of a theory as opposed to the rest of it. So the interlink system was not something that was ever shown to the Free Press or to really any of the experts because it's a plausible future area that I'm looking at that I don't know the answer to. I was simply presenting it to you to see the same thing I'm looking at. I don't know the answer to that one. It just seems suspicious that some of these poles were up for such a short period of time and that so many intersections never had to begin with that I suspect it never was used. It would be a pretty big thing if I'm right, but that's a tack on to everything else, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I stand behind all the stuff about poles moving and all that. I stand behind that rock solid. That's the one thing that I don't actually know about. Speaking of interlinks, while we're on this intersection at Annabelle and Higgins, there it is, northwest corner. And by 2018, poof, and they actually changed the pole. I thought that was very interesting. They took the interlink device off the pole, and they can't just take it off and just leave a slightly taller pole there. They actually take the whole pole down to put in a medium shaft, and of course have to rewire all the push buttons and everything else. Could have just taken the interlink off and left a little bit of a pole extension above, but another make work project. I didn't really go into that, but it's everywhere. And the fact that I'm just showing you that because we happen to drop on Annabella because you mentioned the cyclist signal, and I could show you that while we're on the same intersection, really just shows how endemic this is. Okay, so I've done the first part of the presentation. That certainly was one of the largest sections.
We've lost quite a few of our councillors, but with it being recording, if others have to drop, we can always continue.
Yeah, so what do we suggest we do going forward? Should I keep going after a short break, or should we reschedule, or what does everyone suggest?
Those that remain?
I only have a few minutes left, just so you know. But I'd love to continue this another time. Could we? Well, maybe I've presented a heck of a lot of info. Do you think maybe we should just part ways and reschedule a second one and pick it up?
Yeah, we can try to do that.
Sure.
Just for whoever's interested. I mean, there's no obligation on anybody to come, and I'm not gonna demand this kind of time, but I certainly want to make it available for whoever does want to see it. But I realize that this stuff's in depth and large. It's just I also appreciate the fact that, or I'm very cognizant of the fact that I've made some very harsh, very strong criticisms against professional people and a very big department, very integral part of our city. So I realize that I have to prove my case. I mean, when you look at court cases, when they prosecute somebody for shoplifting or even minor cases, these things take days. Court trials can take days. I'm realizing that I have a very strong case I have to make here, and to do that, it takes time. If that can be appreciated.
I guess, Chris, I mean, we don't have to answer this question today, but I guess maybe you've probably spent some time thinking about it, but I wouldn't mind getting your opinions as to whether or not you think this was just professional ineptitude or if there was potentially some type of fraud going on. If you have any thoughts or opinions on that, I mean, in a closed door session, I mean, I wouldn't mind hearing what your...
That's something I'd have to think about, but I'm very much scientifically minded. I consider myself to be an academic, so I'm very evidence-based. So to me, I'm presenting evidence of what is clearly gross ineptitude, but at the least. But to say it's corruption, I'd have to see the money, I'd have to see the checks, I'd have to see the payouts. I don't know. And being an academic, really, as I consider myself, that's one of the key things you do is you don't talk about things that are beyond your a knowledge base, if that makes sense.
Fair.
Yeah. So I can't say. If I had to put money on it, and I would say there's got to be something deeper here, because you can't accidentally be this bad. But that's just again just surmising. I don't have the money.
That's just comment. I think Councillor Mays wanted to chime in. I noticed Councillor Sharma took her mute off, so she may want to chime in.
Sure.
Has the department seen what we've just seen? Because I seem to be hearing different things from different people. So have they seen a version? Have they seen a presentation, I guess?
No, Councillor Allard actually tried to get the department to attend to my meeting, our presentations back in 2018 when I was doing safety, and the department never attended. So it's been and ever since I've had a couple meetings with the department, but we had a meeting a year ago and agreed we need to have future meetings. We only talked for an hour, and it never materialized. Now, the department has asked me for some of my raw data and research, but I've continually taken the position that I just can't provide it without the opportunity to do what I've done today, being explaining it and going through it. I mean, there's just no point in sending a whole pile of Google links to random intersections. That's all the Word document looks like, or even the raw data without explaining. So I didn't want to risk sending a bunch of data and then be called out for saying, well, what are you showing here? You're just showing polls. There's nothing wrong here. What are you doing? So that's part of why I've been so hesitant to share unless I actually got a meeting and presentation. So the short answer is no, that has never happened.
Okay.
I have offered to meet with the department, but as far as I know, I believe that the department might be here today right now in this meeting.
No, David Patman was invited, and then at shortly after 4 p.m. Declined. So
okay. I can't. I'm still just seeing my own Street View screen, so I don't actually see who's here or not here. So
That's
well,
fine.
The department has not seen this. Then that's the short answer. It's not for lack of opportunity.
Okay, Councillor Sharma, did you have some commentary?
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Nason. Actually, Councillor Mays asked my question. I was wondering about the same thing, and just further to that, I am interested in another session. Chris has taken the time to put this research together, so I'd be open to attending another meeting.
Okay, so with that, I think we can probably close off today's then, Chris, and then you and I can work out on the backside some times that may work for your schedule. You're the person that needs to present, so I think we need to be as accommodating as possible to his time. And I definitely appreciate you giving us this time today.
Well, actually, I'm going to say I've spent about 800 hours on this, so I live and breathe it. So I'm actually very appreciative of getting the chance to show this to you, because I've been dying for other people to see this for a long time. It's, when you spend this many hundreds of hours looking at the same stuff, I mean, I know it's a lot to take in for everybody. I mean, I'd be completely overwhelmed trying to watch this if I hadn't done this for so long. I'd like to make a closing comment if everybody doesn't mind.
Go ahead.
I'd like just, if anybody's thinking about, what are my motives for this, I just want to point out this work transitioned from the fact that I've been fighting with this department since 2012 over what I right now know to be 173 plus missing school zone signs. We've been fighting over these eye-level beacons, and consistently the department tells me that they don't have the resources. They need more money. And that's something they were telling Councillor Allard too, that they need a budget. They needed, I don't even know how many million they wanted to replace the school zone signs, because they felt they wanted to audit every sign in the city. And again, this is where this work comes from, is the department continually saying that they need more resources. I'm saying no, they are overwhelmed with resources. If anything, they need less resources and to do things way more productive. So I just wanted to add that as a closing comment as to this is where this work's coming from. There are serious safety improvements needed in this city. Eye level beacons at crosswalks, at AWFs at signalized intersections, Bishop Grandin, those morning flashers. I've been arguing for those since 2009, and all I got initially was the department took out a set they already had. Missing school zone signs, dual speed limit signing. All of these have been long drawn out, decade-long battles that with the department saying we don't have the money. That's where what you're seeing today has come from. That's how this has materialized.
Okay, well, I appreciate your commentary on that, and I know that you've been working diligently on that and other things. Colleagues that are still here, thank you for staying to the end of this section. And again, Chris, I'll work with you to try to find another time that we can work together.
Thank you. Yes.
They won't compete. I know it won't be this week because some of us have some very busy time and schedule ahead.
I figured. If I may say two things on the way out very quickly. One is the recording of today's meeting can be shared with anybody. This is completely open data. I'm not trying to argue this is internal for us. If David Patman doesn't want to meet on here or in person and wants the recording, he's free to have it. Anybody's free to have this. If you want to put it on YouTube, you have my blessing.
Okay.
But the second thing is in relation to that, I would really appreciate the chance to get a copy of it from you at some point.
Yeah, no, for sure. This is one of the first times I've done it through this application, the Teams app. So I don't know how long it'll take to actually process after, but as soon as I have it, I'll do whatever I can to make sure you have a copy as well.
Okay, thank you. All right, that's everything on my end.